They told me, when I was young, that numbers were honest, that you could trust a ledger the way you trusted a heartbeat. I suppose that was the first lesson I learned that turned into something more dangerous than comfort. I live on the 10th floor of a glass building that looks out over the river and the commuter trains. From up here, the city is patient. The lights go on, and the lights go off, and everything in between can be measured. That steadiness suits me. Like and subscribe for more stories. I work nights now, auditing corporate accounts for a boutique firm that likes to imagine itself scrappy and dangerous. It pays the bills and keeps my head clear. The work is precise, and my life, at least the external shape of it, is tidy. At one point, I thought tidy would save me from the family I was born into. It did not. It just taught me how to arrange the shards after the glass breaks. Mara calls herself a consultant, which is a generous translation of whatever she does. Flash conferences, a feed of staged philanthropy, that kind of thing. She wears suits that cost more than my rent and knows how to tilt a room to her advantage. Our parents liked to be impressed. They were fond of saying, "How did we get so lucky?" as though luck arrived by appointment. They meant, of course, the outward signs, the car, the neighborhood, the guests who spoke in certain ways around the table. Mara fit into that world the way a key fits a lock. Effortless, expected. I fit like a spare part waiting for its machine. My choices: accounting school, a small apartment, a stubborn insistence on not taking shortcuts, were useful only so far as they reflected well on their investment in me. Which is to say, I knew how to be useful. I also knew how to keep records. The fracture came slow and polite. It did not arrive as a raised voice. It arrived as a check that cleared late, a call that went unanswered. A promise about repayment that came with a new excuse. At first I rationalized for everyone, because that is what families do. We apologize for one another. We explain away the obvious. I kept a hidden ledger because documenting felt like building a safety net out of facts. I recorded amounts, dates, notes about conversations. The numbers were clinical, exact. Eventually, I realized how much of my life had been white space between those entries. It was Thanksgiving 2 years ago. There were 22 people in their house that night, all of them performing the comfortable illusion they preferred. I arrived with a pecan pie I had baked that afternoon, wearing something simple enough not to draw attention. Mara came in 30 minutes late with a calloused apology and a story about traffic. She moved through the room like a breeze through flags, and the room adored her for it. She took compliments, absorbed them, and used them as fuel. The night was ordinary until it was not. She made a joke about me, the practical one who kept the books, and the room laughed, along with the way people laugh when they are sorting themselves into roles. I smiled, filed it away. Then she said something else, more precise, the kind of thing that lands and becomes a script everyone else will repeat. "You always look like you just finished balancing a budget," she said, and the laugh that followed felt like a hand on my face. There was nothing dramatic in the moment, no slamming of plates, no raised voices, but there was a constraint tightened around my chest. Later, when I checked my accounts, I found the payments. 6 figures over 5 years, not accidental transfers, recurring, scheduled, invisible to the eye if you were not looking for them. You should understand that discovery does not ignite anything like fireworks. For me, it was an adhesive, a slow peel of scab that revealed a wound I had been pretending did not exist. I canceled the recurring payments the next morning. I did not call, not then. I sent no message. I made a note in the ledger and closed the laptop as if that one click had severed something larger. There is a kind of quiet vengeance in patience. People imagine revenge as a cliff-edge blow, theatrical and satisfying. That is not the model I prefer. I had spent 30 years listening to the economy of my family. Who owed what? Who expected what? Who hid behind who? And I began to design a correction. Not a correction of balance, though that would be a part of it. I wanted a correction of perception. Perception makes a strong currency. Reputation is a fragile stock. Once it drops, it rarely recovers. Mara had built a reputation on surface things, curated images, well-timed anecdotes, a tasteful display of distress when necessary. She was good at creating scarcity, the aura of being slightly beyond reach. It earned her invitations, loans, favor. It also made her systemically dependent on other people's assumptions. If you cut the supports methodically, if you change the margins quietly, the structure tilts. That is what I set myself to do. With numbers, you can plan outcomes. With patience, you can engineer consequences. I started small. A transfer flagged as suspicious at the bank. A friendly conversation with a collections officer who had been poorly briefed and recorded a different name, an incorrect invoice sent to the wrong address. Each action was a pebble thrown where it would cause the right ripple, and then I waited to see which neighbors noticed the eddies. It is important, before I go farther, to say what I did not do. I did not burn photos or break glass. I did not confront Mara in public or shout her name in the street. That would have been noisy and predictable, and frankly, indulgent. My revenge would be colder than performance. It would be precise. The way a surgeon's cut is precise. The way good audits are exact. Only because they follow the contours of weakness. I built an alias, and then another. I hired a private investigator. Not to find skeletons. I already had them, neat in rows on my spreadsheet, but to corroborate what I suspected about the story she had been telling. Evidence is sweeter when it multiplies itself. At night, after work, I walked the neighborhood where Mara had rented a small loft until she decided it was time for the upgrade. I made contact with her bank, discreetly, in a way that would elicit only the minimal report, something that flagged a pattern but would not go public. I sent an email to the family accountant with an attached spreadsheet labeled as Consolidated Personal Liabilities Review. I forwarded copies, always with a professional note, never accusatory. It also makes the receiver complicit. When friends and family open attachments from someone they trust, they seldom assume malice. A curious thing happens when the people around you get a faint suggestion. Rumors, which feel like wind, start to take measurable shape. People exchange messages, and those messages become corroboration. Memory is crafty. Confronted by a ledger and an email, it prefers to file the new narrative under fact rather than recall how different things used to feel. Most of them fell in line. Not out of malice, though some of that existed, but because peeling back the curtain required cognitive work they had already outsourced to Mara. She had worn responsibility like a scent. It filled rooms and made others feel inadequate by contrast. When I supplied an alternate scent in the form of numbers, it began to replace the old one. There is a ruthlessness required for this sort of work. You have to accept that people will be harmed. You have to decide whether the harm is proportional to the transgression. I did that math more than once, and I returned to the ledger, not because I am heartless, but because I wanted accuracy. Numbers do not exaggerate. They do not beg. They are witnesses. The traps I set were architectural rather than explosive. A late notice here. A reissued invoice there. A homeowners association letter sent for a small zoning violation that was, curiously, noticed and acted upon. I made sure each sting was traceable back to a paper trail. Paper trails are good for convincing others, and good for convincing yourself that you are not simply acting on bitterness. The point was to shift the whole frame, to make the small, obscured truths visible to people who preferred to look elsewhere, to let consequences arrive with the same quiet inevitability that an audited balance shows a deficit. I tell you this not with a flourish, but with a kind of calm that is, for me, habitual. Revenge is not a party. It is an inventory. You take stock of what was taken. You name the sums, and you determine where each unit should return. There are nights I awake and imagine Mara's face when she opens an email and reads the assembled truth. I wonder if she will cry, or rage, or perform the particular brand of wounded dignity she has practiced for years. I imagine the way our parents will move in the space between accusation and denial. I imagine the small humiliations that will be administered with polite tones. These imaginings are not cruelty. They are part of the design. You cannot predict human response precisely, but you can influence it by setting the conditions. The city, patient as always, provides the best theater. People will move through their lives and bump against the thing I have set into motion, and the structure will respond. Tonight, I sit at my kitchen table with a small lamp and the ledger open. I have flagged the transfers. I have printed the correspondence. I have arranged the documents in a way that will look, to someone else, like a careful, archival effort, and not the scaffolding of a trap. In the morning I will send a carefully worded message to our parents. It will be clinical, devoid of accusation, more of a prompt than a provocation. Attached is a consolidation of recurring transfers to your daughter over the last 5 years, for your review. I try, sometimes, to imagine a path that does not end in this kind of rupture. I search my memory for a moment where an honest conversation could have prevented the necessity of a ledger. But memory, unlike ledgers, is pliable. It shows us the faces we want to keep. In the end, the choice felt simple, because the math was clear. I had been funding an illusion with my life. What I cannot say is whether the consequence will feel like justice. People tend to think those words are synonymous. They are not. Justice is a concept traded in courts and in hearts. What I trade in is correction. I am, for now, content to let the city perform its slow machinery. I have turned off the recurring payments, documented the transfers, and prepared the file. The rest, the conversations, the silences, the ways a family rearranges itself when the scaffolding is removed, will unfold in a cadence I have begun but not yet completed. There is a stillness before the first recipients of my message open their inboxes. I make tea. The kettle hisses like a minor alarm. I am careful to keep my hands steady. The numbers will not shift because my pulse races. They are fixed, immutable, until people rewrite them. And when they do, I will be ready to meet the edits with another entry, another careful adjustment. Revenge, I am learning, is less a roar and more a ledger kept to the minute. It's strange how quickly silence becomes a verdict. By the second morning, my phone had stopped buzzing. The polite curiosity from our parents' friends turned into avoidance. The email I sent did its work without fanfare. A few attached spreadsheets, a timeline, copies of transfers. No narrative, no emotional garnish. Numbers speak better than I ever could. Mara didn't call that day. She called 2 days later. "Elliot," she said, her voice flat, cautious. "What did you send them?" I looked out the window. The city was gray, still waking. "The truth. You've ruined me." "No," I said quietly. "You did that. I just printed the receipts." She hung up after that. I think she expected me to sound angry, maybe triumphant. But the thing about revenge done properly is that it empties the room of drama. There's no shouting left to do when the structure has already collapsed. Over the next week, the unraveling began in increments. Her name disappeared from a company bio. A sponsorship post on social media quietly vanished. The bank froze one of her accounts, pending internal review. People who used to orbit her found reasons to step away. It's not that anyone confronted her directly. It's that she became radioactive, and reputation, once contaminated, doesn't recover easily. My parents didn't call for a while either. Then, one evening, my father showed up at my door. He didn't knock right away. I heard his car idling downstairs and knew he was gathering himself. When he finally came up, he looked smaller, not physically, but in presence. The confidence that used to announce him had thinned out. "I read everything," he said. "Good," I replied. He nodded once, then studied the room. The small desk, the stack of papers, the minimalist furniture that made it clear I lived alone and liked it that way. "You planned this for a long time." 2 years, I said. "I learned patience from you." There was a silence heavy enough to bend the air between us. He sat, uninvited, in the chair by the window. "She's not handling it well." "I imagine not." "She's still your sister." "Was." He winced, as if the correction had been physical. "You know what this will do to the family." "I do. That's why I did it, right." He stayed another minute, maybe 2. He didn't argue. I think part of him understood. My father had always believed in consequences, just never thought they'd be issued internally. When he left, he didn't look back. That night, I went through the ledger one last time. Every figure balanced, every file archived. The numbers no longer carried weight. They were simply evidence of a completed transaction. I slept better than I had in years. 3 months passed before I heard Mara's name again. Someone at work mentioned she'd sold the apartment. Rumor said she was leaving the country. A fresh start. I didn't care where she went. I wasn't chasing ruin. I was reclaiming accuracy. Sometimes I think people misunderstand revenge. They imagine it as heat, a burst of fire that consumes everything in its path. But I've come to see it as cold math. The trick isn't in punishing someone. It's in returning the world to equilibrium. By the 4th month, my parents had resumed calling. Cautious, polite conversations about health and weather. They never mentioned her, and I never asked. Families heal by pretending they were never sick. I kept my apartment spotless, worked late, took quiet walks by the river. I even started swimming again, something I hadn't done since before the split. People ask if I feel guilt. I don't. Not because I'm proud of what I did. I'm not sure pride belongs in this kind of equation, but because guilt implies uncertainty, and I have none left. The truth is, Mara would have destroyed me eventually, not by accident, but by the slow erosion she's always been good at. She doesn't kill with knives. She kills with charm, with half-truths that sound more polished than your reality. It took me years to understand that silence was my best weapon. Now, the silence is hers. A few weeks ago, a mutual acquaintance sent me a photo. Mara in Lisbon, wearing sunglasses, sitting by the water. She looked fine, maybe better than fine. That's the thing about people like her. They adapt. But she'll never regain what she lost, credibility. Every smile she gives now will be doubted. That's what I wanted. Not her ruin, her truth exposed. I printed the photo and slipped it into the back of the ledger. A reminder that even perfect balance sheets can leave a residue. Sometimes I sit by my window late at night, watching the city hum. The trains move like veins of light. There's a comfort in the predictability. No one here knows the story. No one asks questions. I like it that way. The thing about getting away with something is, you don't celebrate. You just move on. I've stopped thinking in terms of victory or defeat. I think in terms of correction. And the world, for the first time in years, feels corrected. I keep the ledger in a locked drawer now. Not as evidence, not as a trophy, but as a record of order restored. The numbers will fade over time. Maybe the ink will blur. That's fine. The work is done. When I close the drawer, I feel nothing, and that, to me, is peace.